Hey everybody, I'm Dan Lapel for New Focus Recordings. Really excited to be joined by my good friend Greg Beyer and the Arcomusical crew about this wonderful album coming out in March, Exile and Emigre. How's it going, guys? Good to see you.
It's going really well, Dan. How are you doing?
Good, good. I hear you're already out on the road, taking advantage of the post-Omicron reality to bring the music to the people.
Yeah, we're all on tour right now at Ithaca College. We are on a performing arts series, and we're performing tonight a lot of music from this new album, Emigre and Exile. And
Wonderful.
we're the members of Arcomusical here on the call right now are Rachel Taylor and Elena Ross. And we're also joined by one of our composers and collaborators, Matt Ulery. In fact, it's Matt's composition, Emigre and Exile, that is that has given the title to the album that we're releasing on the Panoramic label.
Great. Did I mix up? Did I say exile and emigre? I did.
You did,
Yeah.
but that's okay. I mean, do you
Sorry.
want to start over?
No, no. I think it's okay. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It's. I mean, the concepts have a sort of symbiotic relationship, I suppose. So,
Definitely.
uh, great. Well, you know what? I think it'd be cool to. I mean, you've been working with Baron Bow almost as long as I've known you. Not quite as long as I've known you, but I think when when I got to Manhattan School of Music, that was sort of around the time that you started this work, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
around 2000, 2001, 2002.
Just shy of that. I started playing the bit about in 98, 99.
Oh, okay.
I think I
Sorry.
made my first
Yeah.
trip to Brazil actually in '99, which is when I brought back my first instruments and that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to give the sort of overview of how you came to this work and how you sort of developed it? I mean, it's really you've put together like
Yeah, I can. I'll
amazing
try to make it quick.
trajectory. Yeah.
Because it's a story that I've told. It's there's a longer version of this story on our website that people can
Okay.
check out if they like to. But basically, I was in New York City, as you were, Manhattan School of Music, as a graduate student at the time, and doing a lot of music, a lot of contemporary music, right? And so that necessarily means working with composers and digging into all sorts of contemporary techniques and such. And so collaborating with composers to work on solo drum set pieces or solo marimba pieces or solo multi-percussion pieces was kind of the milieu. That was what I was doing. And you and I got to know each other at a chamber music festival at the Bowdoin Festival. That was kind of our real big bonding moment. Um, and yeah, fond memories of that. But I had always harbored an interest in Brazilian music, where I went to undergraduate school at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. My professor was deeply involved in African music and Brazilian music, and had made several trips to Africa and Brazil to bring back, you know, musical languages and share them with the students. And so the Berimbau was a known quantity for me, but it wasn't something that I had fallen in love with as an undergraduate. In fact, it happened really happenstantially in New York City, at a brick and mortar shop that was called Drummers World, which was like a mecca for percussionists from all over the world, literally all over the world, because New York City being, the metropolitan city that it is, being a kind of a crossroads for musicians from all over the world on tour and such. It was a place where drummers and percussionists would hang out, trade, swap stories, and also swap instruments. And there were some fantastic instruments that were available there. And one day I was in there just minding my own business, picking up things ostensibly for my drum set or who knows what. And I heard this amazing sound from the back of the shop. So I went to go take a look, and there was this guy just wailing on a bit and bow. And I was mesmerized by what he was doing, and when he stopped playing, we struck up a conversation, and he said, if there's one album that you should go and get, check this out, you should go and get Saudades by Manuel Vasconcelos. So this was 98. Tower Records was still a thing, and it was just a couple of blocks away from that point. So I went over to Tower Records, found the record, went back to my place, put the CD on, and my jaw just hit the floor. So I was transcribing this music, completely in love with what I was hearing, and then literally within the space of a week or two, I got this phone call from a Brazilian singer-songwriter that I was playing some gigs with, saying, "Greg, just got back from Brazil, was on vacation for a couple of weeks with my family. We had a great time. You need to come over to the house. We have some gigs coming up. Come on over. Let's rehearse. By the way, I brought you something." So went up to his house and walked in, and he got this big smile on his face, ran up his staircase, came back down, and he gifted me with my very first berimbau. And that happened literally like a week after this other thing had happened in Midtown Manhattan. So, that just felt like a sign. And that sign is that calling, if you will, is something that I've been following ever since. And I'm really delighted to say that the world of musicians and the world of music making, through the lens of the berimbau and related African musical bows, is something that for me is still ongoing and growing. Feels like a community that just keeps expanding. The pandemic notwithstanding, there are still several collaborations and relationships in Africa and in Brazil, and here, of course, in the United States, that just keep blossoming. So with that said, this album that we're releasing on your label is actually the third album that this particular group will have released, in our existence as Arcomusical here in the United States. And excitingly, it's out literally on the heels of a new album that our brothers and sisters in Arcomusical Brazil just released in Brazil, an album called Semente that I produced in 2019 and was just released this last year on a beautiful new record label in Brazil called Selo Grão Discos. And it's a beautiful album of their original music. So this story, the berimbau, has literally become a kind of a dance partner for me, and it kind of leads the dance, and relationships blossom and form and develop, and so there are several people in our organization, and in our circles in different countries around the world that are pursuing artistry with the musical bow, and allowing new and beautiful things to keep happening with this musical instrument that we all love so much.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that we met at the Bowdoin Chamber Music Festival, and I think,
That's right.
and this isn't one of those weird detours that's going to be all about, some nostalgic memories. This will have a point. Uh, I feel like, one of the reasons that we connected so much is you and I sort of share a bit of a sense of fluidity between styles. Like we like to do a lot of different kinds of playing. We played together some of our own tunes. We did that also at Manhattan School of Music.
Yeah.
We played Mainster.
I remember.
And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is so great and amazing about the watching you do this project with the berimbau over several years now is how it sort of really is an expression of that sort of sense of boundless creativity that I think you have, and you're able to sort of bring in composers from the more like sort of contemporary concert world, and you're able to also like play some music that's reflective of more folkloric influences and really delve into the Brazilian culture that surrounds this instrument and capoeira, and like really immerse yourself in it. And it's just great. It's like, to me, it's like such a holistic expression of greatness, uh, and so it's exciting to be able to sort of see this third album, which is a continued fruition of that sort of characteristic. Um, You know what? I think let's listen to a little bit of music. Let's
Sure.
allow Matt to chat and introduce his piece and this movement. Listen to it, talk a bit more about it after we hear some of it. So, Matt, I'm gonna toss the ball to you for a second. Tell us a little bit about this piece, how it came about, and maybe introduce the sixth movement really briefly.
Sure. Um, I was familiar with this instrument, Berimbau, mainly from None of Us Can Say This work with Don Cherry, the trumpet player. I definitely have a strong improvised music, jazz background. Um, and and then when I met Greg doing some other music of mine, and I saw this group, Arcomusical, in Chicago, where I live, and was absolutely blown away, mesmerized, instant fan. And I just got to talking to Greg about maybe trying to write something for the ensemble um, since I dabble in writing music, and they came up with official commission, and I didn't know what I was doing for this ensemble. As far as I'm concerned, this group Arcomusical is one of the only groups anywhere playing this instrument in like fine-tuned chamber music settings. Am I wrong, Greg? Or
We have relatives actually. The group that I mentioned, Arcomusical Brazil, that's a literal and direct connection to the work that I did in Brazil as a Fulbright scholar in Belo Horizonte. But there are two other berimbau orchestras in Brazil that I can think of that are run by some really wonderful people, and they do something akin to what we do, but in their own way that is a lot more steeped in the capoeira world because that's the world that they live in. So I'm thinking specifically of a group called De Oba de X, which stands for the Orchestra of Tuned Berimbaus of Daim Shekere. That's his name. Daim Shekere is the leader of that group, and he was a disciple of Ramiro Musoto, who was an Argentinian percussionist who fell in love with Brazilian music and specifically the berimbau, much in the same way that I did. He was about 10 years my senior, actually, but he passed away a good decade ago, sadly, much too young from a cancer. But Chikere inherited most of Hamiro's instruments and runs this group now with a group of young percussionists and capoeiristas in Salvador, in Bahia. And then down in Sao Paulo, it's a wonderful uh, group called, again, the Orquestra de Berimbau Afinados do Moro do Querosene, which is a neighborhood in Sao Paulo. And yeah, it's run by a gentleman who played berimbau blues, and I'll think of his name here in a second, but he's a real sweet gentleman and runs that group too. So there are a couple of groups in Brazil that are doing this. More recently, actually, there's an orchestra of berimbaus an orchestra of tuned berimbaus that started up in Portugal. They've been in touch with us. I think they took a cue actually from the work that we've been doing and have started something of their own in response to that because he's the leader of that group has been in touch with me and has said as much. So in a way, it's kind of inspiring because we've created something, we've made a statement, and it's blossoming in the way that art does.
mm-hmm. Thanks, man. So when I was actually in Portugal a few years ago, and talking to Greg on the phone, and we were kind of firming up the plans for me to try and write something for the ensemble, and that got me thinking about the kind of concepts and the title of this piece, Emigre and Exile, and I wrote some of the initial themes uh, on that trip. But and we were just talking about this today in the van about exploring other folks' music for our own pleasure. And once we can internalize, mainly rhythmically, grooves from these different cultures, then we can allow it to show itself through our composition. And if you understand it, if you understand how it feels and how the dance feels, and you go to write your music and allow it to blossom, to show itself, that it can be genuine in that way, I think. So when I was writing this piece, there's a lot of influence. There's a lot of different types of influence from different folks, and it's a lot of music that I've been able to explore playing bass with other people. Living in Chicago, there's a lot of communities that need bass players, so I've been fortunate to play lots of different kinds of folk music with people. So a lot of the influences have just kind of crept into my playing and therefore compositions. So this movement 6 is the last movement of this big piece. It's called "The Only Thing You Can Do Is Jump," I think, right? That's right. That's right. Kind of the most exciting movement. I will say there's several particular influences that I can talk about briefly, that we hear. There's a particular music from Afghanistan that was banned by Taliban like 30 years ago, and I don't even know what the instruments are called, but some kind of small hand drums, tabla-like drums, and some kind of guitar-like instrument. And I don't know anything about that music, but I heard it one time, and when you hear something and then you're like, oh, I want to try and internalize what that is, and then it becomes part of you. So there's some of that music in there. There's some Peruvian or Andes music, wino music from Peru and the Andes that has crept into there rhythmically.
Wonderful. That was great to hear. Thank you, Matt. So, I mean, I'm interested in this idea, this topic that you brought up just as we were sort of going into the excerpt there. You called it refried world music, but it opens up a whole sort of world of inquiry, I think, for musicians in general, as we all do play a lot more music that is related to or drawn from or rooted in folkloric traditions, and that's become a bigger part, I think, of concert music, which is great. But then the question is, what is the experience of trying to really learn about that performance practice, and specifically, I think, feel, and as it relates to rhythm, most prominently, and how that might be divergent to some performance practices that are more oriented towards fully notated music, and or it's not even really just about fully notated versus not, because I know that a lot of music that's folkloric influenced is also fully notated, but the idea is you want to try to somehow be inside the tradition that it's inspired by. So actually, I want to maybe get some of the members of the band involved in this conversation. Uh, Maybe tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to Arcomusical, maybe some of your other practices, and how you navigate this sort of interesting issue of diverse kinds of playing, I guess, in a way. Rachel, do you want to field this?
Yeah, sure. When I went to NIU for my master's degree, in percussion performance, I also did like a focus in ethnomusicology. Um, I started getting really interested in that during my undergrad studies, and it was really important to me to do more than classical percussion study. And I think a lot of percussionists feel this way. It's not just me, because rhythms in non-Western cultures are just, I would say they're more fun. Like they're really challenging in a lot of ways, right? And to me, playing in a practice room like the same excerpt over and over and over again was beneficial and important in certain contexts. But for my brain and for like what I craved, that kind of challenge, rhythmically challenge, and like learning things by rote and by ear rather than reading music, was, it just felt like eating your fruits and vegetables. Like it just felt really good for me to do that. And so I prioritized that. And in that time, I was able to, go to Bali and study Balinese music. And I played in all of the world music ensembles at NIU. And we can get into like a whole discussion about world music, right? Like Western music is also world music, right? Like we're just one globe or one, music is just, when we talk about Western and non-Western, there's like a hierarchy there, and it's not really, it's like a societal thing that comes from us as a society saying like classical music, Western classical music is like the peak of everything, right? So it was really important to me to be able to understand music from other cultures and not just listen from far away and appreciate it and go, I have no idea what's going on, but rather like get my hands dirty, if you will, like actually get the rhythm into my body too and know what that felt like, because it really grows you as an individual and as a musician. And so then during my second year, I had the opportunity to join Arcomusical, and it really changed the way that I learned music. It changed the way that I memorized music. It changed my perspective on rhythm in general and feel and groove. So I owe a lot of my growth as a musician to what I did at NIU and in Arcomusical as well. It's just it's enriching in a lot of different ways. And I have always been an ensemble player. I always been in percussion ensemble. I love playing chamber music. So this is where I feel at home, is making music with other people and experiencing a piece like Matt's music. I mean, it truly is an experience. It is a journey that music takes you on as a player and as an audience member. So to have the privilege to bring that to life is really, really special.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, I think one point you made that was really excellent, and I hope I didn't create a misimpression. I absolutely agree that Western music. Well, first of all, Western music is, what does that even mean? It's like too huge. It's like saying African music or South American. I mean, it's just like it's too massive of a category. But Carter, playing Elliott Carter, there's a feel there. There's like a culture that surrounds that music that you need to understand, and just as there's a culture that surrounds playing tango, or there's a culture, you know what I mean? And you need to, it can't just be, okay, these are characteristic chord progressions or melodic figures. There's like a whole sort of way of playing, and that's, I guess, what I was getting at. And one of the things I think is so great about this group is both the ability to create some kind of hybrid, but also a clear respect and awareness for where the material is coming from, the roots of the material. And again, not to, you know, pump my friend up too much, but I think there's a particular Gregness to that quality, and because of the way you've always had a lot of respect for all the musics that you're sort of drawing on. Ethan or Elena, do you guys want to weigh in on this? It's an interesting conversation. I would love to hear your perspective, experience with some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think if we're talking about like dance and feel, going back to that topic, one of the things I like to talk about with people with this instrument is coming from a percussionist. We're really used to needing to fit our bodies around whatever instrument we're playing. Like a marimba, like we're forced to like move laterally, or timpani, we're forced to like swivel and move our body to where the instrument is. What I find really liberating about the berimbau is we're actually holding it. And we're actually part of the instrument because the sound of the instrument comes into our bodies. So that space between the gourd and our bodies is where we create the vibrato of the instrument. And so having this instrument that we can literally dance with, we can, if we want to, we can turn around. We can move feet in either direction. It really allows us to express the music. And especially with Emigre, we're dancing the whole time as a group, like in the odd meters, constantly changing around, and being able to just, it's freedom. For me, the berimbau is freedom. It's liberating, and it's just an enjoyable experience to perform with.
Cool. Elena, do you want to jump in?
Sure. And if I get cut off, my phone just gave me the signal that I have 10% battery left, but I will, so I might make it a little bit short, but kind of tied in with what Ethan had said about movement and feel. I love that about this instrument as well. But when you, where do I want to go with this? With performance and feel for this music, a lot of some of the parts that are in here, I came from a background, you know, of the Western background. I started playing violin and piano when I was very young, but I didn't start playing percussion until I started learning quote unquote world music. I started learning Brazilian music when I was in high school, different styles of samba and other drumming music, primarily from Brazil. And there's a spot at the end of this piece, I don't know if we're gonna play an excerpt of that later. There's a spot at the end of the piece that's in one of the styles that I play. And I love it when you get to parts of the music where you're familiar with, you know what that feel is, because you want it to be reflective. You want somebody that knows that music, that folkloric music, that's non-Western, wherever it's being pulled from, those rhythms are being pulled from, and maybe the tonality. You want people to hear that and be familiar with it, and not just be like, oh, they're kind of executing it. You want them to be, you want them to think that we're executing it well, and you want them to be proud and happy that somebody is doing that and recognizing that. Because if you don't achieve that, then you kind of miss it for them. And it's, in my mind, it's a little bit disrespectful. You want to do it justice, and you want them to recognize that.
Can I jump in? This music is through composed. This piece is through composed. I wrote it basically originally like a lead sheet, a lot of it. So melody and chords. And then I figured out a way to orchestrate it for this, as I was developing it for this ensemble. And then I made up a bass part. But what I want to say is, though it's through composed, it's not like other like contemporary music or classical music that anyone can kind of jump in, get a sub. You know, you can't send a sub in this ensemble because it's 100% all about trust. And everybody has to, there's a collective trust to create a collective groove, a collective feel. And that is so very special. And it's a very much performance based music. You can't, not even, I mean, people can learn it, of course. New people have come in to play the piece, but, and certainly another bass player could do it. I have by far the easiest part because I'm playing regular time the whole time. I'm not pocketing around the melody like everybody else is doing. So I guess I could get a sub, guys. I just wanted to point that out for listeners.
No, I mean
How
that's also an interesting point, and I think a lot of what it seems like you guys are talking about is the what things animate the music beyond something that is sort of intellectually codified, right? When we talk about what Western music is, actually, I think in a way what we're talking about is institutionalized music, right? Um, when Bartok was, you know, trying on music from the Balkans, I don't like, in a sense, that's Western music, but I think most of us consider that as something else or folkloric music or whatever, right? And the trajectory of institutionalized Western music has all this whole network of relationships with musics that just wherever they are geographically, we might not really readily call them Western. But then the question is, what is exactly that line? Is it? It's. I think it's the institution. It's the money involved. It's the sort of like the way it's presented, and anybody who spends a lot of time with music outside of that setting, whatever the music is, and I think I would say this is even true for repertoire. You know that there's a lot more that animates that music than the way you would experience it within a more institutional context, right? And so all these things you guys are talking about, it's just so refreshing to hear, you know, well, yeah, I mean, it's all music needs that animation, it both for the respect of the culture, but also just for the like that is where the music actually lies, I think, no matter what it is. So maybe on that note, we should pivot to another piece and take a little listen. I'm trying to think of what is the best segue at this point. We could go in a pretty different direction. Sort of definitely the most abstract avant-garde piece on the album, I think, is Alex's piece, right? Why don't we listen to that? It sort of it takes us in a different direction for a second.
Sure.
So I think I've been pronouncing Alex's last name wrong for like 25 years. It's not Lunsqui, is it?
No, but that's close. It's Lunsqui.
Okay. Lunsqui.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a good Italian Brazilian.
Right on. And he's based in Sao Paulo now, right?
Now he's a professor at Unesp, yeah, the State University of
Right.
Sao Paulo, right
Right.
there in the city. Yeah. He's an extremely well-known, internationally engaged composer who's written pieces for European orchestras and chamber ensembles. He's written for and had pieces premiered by the New York Philharmonic. And, you know, I'm really humbled to say that he and I, just like you and I, have been friends for a couple of decades and have realized pieces of his, over a dozen pieces and projects of his over the course of time.
Yeah.
And it's special to see the way that the percussion community in particular has embraced his musical output, but then the larger new music community as well is just enamored with him and his special, unique voice. So
Yeah,
Repercussio, the piece that that we play on this album, is actually the oldest piece in the repertoire. It was originally composed for a student ensemble of mine at Northern Illinois University, to which Rachel made reference earlier. And he wrote it for us in 2006, but then he revised it for Arcomusical in 2017, 2018, and then we re-recorded it ostensibly we recorded it for our last album, Spinning in the Wheel. But it didn't make the cut of that album, and we're really delighted to have put it on this album instead. So it's the one album, it's the one piece on this album that was not recorded in Arcomusical Studios, right there in DeKalb. This was recorded in Batavia at a place called Kiwi Audio. We recorded this back in 2017, 2018. When was the session? 2018, cool. I think. Yeah.
Should we take a listen to maybe
Let's have
some
a listen to it.
The middle section, which sort of gets into some extended technique territory?
Sure.
So here we go.
With pleasure. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's a wonderful excerpt, certainly contrasting with a lot of the stuff on the album. And I think, my sort of initial impression of a texture like that is that brings us more into a sort of like academic modernist, experimental timbrelist type of world. But I think there's something that's sort of wrong-headed about that too, because every once in a while I'm exploring some kind of what we would call folkloric tradition, and I'm like, oh wow, there's like all this extended technique stuff going on, and we tend to forget that like experimentation is also not the sole purview of the institution either, So I mean, certainly Alex is really active within the contemporary concert world, and this piece is sort of immaculately crafted. But if you just drop down and listen to that sound world in itself, this sort of scratchy, almost spatialized, I imagine it's sort of going through the different instruments in the ensemble, right? Maybe that's not a texture that sort of only belongs to sort of electroacoustic analog written music, or
I'd like to relate a story about our collaboration as he was writing the piece. Before he wrote Repercussio, he wrote a solo work for me called Iris, which was short for Arco-Iris, which means rainbow in Portuguese.
I remember that piece.
You remember Iris, yeah. And the idea was that he was literally exploring and trying to come up with every color of the rainbow that's, timbrally possible with the berimbau. And he and I locked ourselves in a room for hours on end and just like experimented with the sound, and he would ask a million questions. And the thing about it that was so engaging and so memorable was that it was a very physical engagement with the instrument and with the timbres. It was like, what can you do here? What can you do here? What does this sound like? Like touch this, feel, like everything was tactile with him, and very hyper energetically engaged. But the other part of it that was so important in that story was that because of the berimbau being so intimately woven into the story of the Afro-Brazilian the Afro-Brazilian art form of capoeira, which is an art form that grew out of resistance to oppression, specifically to slavery, right? The African experience in Brazil, which mirrors the African experience here in the United States. We talked a lot about physical gestures that from the inside of the instrument that tried as hard as they could to almost break out, to break free of something. So we talked a lot about liberation and seizure, enclosure in a physical context when dealing with the instrument. And we got to some places, energetically that felt extremely vibrant and and hot in a way, right? Because we were talking about topics that are very intense and controversial, and things that, you know, in this current cultural climate that we live in, things that are extremely important, right, to this day, to have a reckoning with that original sin of the Americas, right? Of the idea that somehow another race of human beings could be degraded such that they could be treated less than equal, right? So, you know, if there is a push here in the United States or in Brazil towards a more democratic, just nation, that's something that's been led for centuries, not by African people in the Americas, right? And it is the civil rights movement which has opened up the gateways for, you know, for same-sex marriage and all sorts of other kinds of equalities. That was always led by, you know, African people here in the United States, and those similar kinds of movements certainly alive and alive and vibrant in a country like Brazil, right? So, Movimento Negro, for example, the Black movement, is very much you know, alive and well and happening throughout the Americas constantly. So the berimbau, for people who practice, you know, capoeira, it's not just a musical instrument, right? It's a symbol of resistance to oppression in all of its forms. Because the thing about oppression is that it's slippery, right? Technically, slavery was abolished in the end at various points along the latter half of the 19th century. But we all know that Jim Crow is alive and well here in the States, and, you know, you could call it something else in other countries, but it's the same kind of transformative cancer that just keeps keeping people down. And so, you know, when we play this instrument, it is important. We do talk about these things and keep these ideas very much front and center, because, you know, because there are people who really appreciate, you know, what we do creatively with the instrument, but there are other people who will come out and say, hey, listen, you know, who are you to be doing anything with that instrument, right? And so it's important to remember that what really matters when we're working with this instrument is that the instrument has opened up several relationships with people from Brazil, from Africa, and the maintenance of the cultivation of those relationships, the respect that one transfers back and forth, is urgent and is alive and is constantly transforming. It's organic. And so it needs to be cared for, right?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up, and I guess I would say from my experience, the percussion community is more aware of these issues of sort of instrumental lineage and connection to history and sensitivity than most of the other instrument communities, and perhaps that's because percussion is such a key instrument in a lot of the cultures that were sort of historically oppressed in the Americas. So it makes sense. But that kind of awareness would serve maybe some of the rest of the instrument groups well, to have a bit more, you know, sensitivity around these things. Should we listen to one of the other pieces? Maybe the opening track, Jeremy Muller's Singularity.
Sure.
Is he referring at all to moment when our consciousness gets uploaded to the cloud and we lose agency, or not?
No.
Oh,
no.
Okay, fair enough. We'll save that for a different album.
we're talking about with Emigre, Matt reiterated the idea of trust around the ensemble and how everything is passing around. Singularity, I think, has surprised us in a way in how it has challenged us as a group in some ways that other pieces haven't quite hit a particular, like it hits us a little differently than some of the other pieces. So that rhythmic figure that you're hearing at the beginning repeats itself. It's the same way, the same form for a few measures, but as the piece expands, it changes. Our eighth note groove either gets pushed ahead or pushed back, so we're not always on like the same partial of beats. And so Greg, Elena, and I, for the most part, are holding down that eighth note groove. And the trust we need to have that perpetual motion keeps going in how almost erratically it goes. There is a pattern to it, but it can be perceived as erratic. It is a hallmark of the piece and a way that it's challenged us and allows us to build that trust even more.
Jeremy is a friend that we have had a relationship with for well over a decade. This is the second piece that he's written for the ensemble. The first one was called Quotient. And quotient refers to a mathematical quotient or a mathematical formula. And that way of sort of spinning out musical ideas is something that's deeply woven into the DNA of the way that Jeremy thinks about music. So when Ethan was referring to an eighth note groove, there's an ostinato that Jeremy presents at the beginning of the piece, and that ostinato shifts relative to the beat and gets clipped over time. So a 9-beat pattern, because the music is in 9/8, it's in a compound ternary meter. But that pattern becomes an eighth note pattern that then shifts itself against the meter, and then it gets clipped again and gets clipped again. So he's constantly playing with pattern, and the way that that unfolds and spins out over time is in a state of constant transformation. So there are moments of stasis in the piece. It opens with something solid so that we can actually find our groove, but then 6 measures in, it's shifting again, it's shifting every bar, to a point at which there may be 3 or 4 of us holding down various parts of that groove, but then one person walks away and does something else, not literally walking away, but it shifts the role in the piece to a different voice in the piece, and then only two or three people, or only 2 people have that line. At one point, only one person has that line. It actually happens to be Elena. It's at a point in the middle of the piece, and so he has a really like his formal construction, his formal way for having a piece unfold is very formulaic, but at the same time, something that he's constantly pruning, and making sure that it unfolds in a way that feels and sounds right to his ear. But you're right, Dan, in the sense that it has a very celebratory and joyous texture, and we really couldn't think of a better way to start the album than to feature Jeremy's piece right at the beginning. There's something really special and danceable about it, almost from the get-go, that we found really attractive and wanted to highlight right off the bat.
Yeah, it brings you into the world of the group in a really nice way, I think. Great. Well, we should make sure to get a chance to talk a little bit about your 3 pieces on here, Greg, which are all wonderful and sort of have a progression from ensemble to duo to solo. Do you want to, maybe should we listen a little bit to a part of the ensemble piece? There's a Pat Metheny quote in here, isn't there?
There's a reference to Metheny, and there's also a reference to Luciano Berio. The piece Linnea
Cool.
makes an appearance right at the beginning of the work. Yeah.
Well, what's your preference? Would you prefer to hear for everybody here at the beginning, or somewhere in the middle?
Let's listen to the beginning.
Great. Cool. So here's the beginning of Fios e linhas. What
Close.
did I do?
Fios e linhas. Wires
Nice.
and lines in Portuguese. Yeah.
Beautiful. So on that particular track, we heard Gregory Beyer on berimbau, plus several instruments in percussion ensemble texture. Why don't you give us a little backstory on this piece, and maybe as part of it, the suite of 3 pieces that are included on the album?
Sure. Well, this piece is perhaps the furthest afield from anything that I've written prior for berimbau, in the sense that it involves these other percussion instruments, percussion ensemble, and specifically this piece was commissioned by the University of Virginia Percussion Ensemble, and that ensemble's director, Yijing Feng, who is a wonderful percussionist in her own right, brilliant mind and musician, and it's effectively a percussion keyboard quartet with a berimbau in the middle, and the piece begins with a unison texture between the berimbau and the vibraphone, and then eventually is joined by the marimba. And the sound of the marimba and the vibraphone playing in unison effectively with the additional texture of the berimbau instantly reminded me of the way that Barrio's famous 2 piano 2 percussion work, Linnea, unfolds in the beginning of the piece. Absolutely haunting, riveting work of music, and hence the name Wires and Lines, linhas in the sense, referring specifically to that Barrio texture and the way that it unfolds. The piece was originally was based on a solo etude that I wrote for a berimbau tune to a minor third, and so the piece just unfolded from that concept. The tuning of that piece, we use a set of tunings that are based on whole number ratios. It's a Pythagorean tuning system, so we don't play in just intonation with these open wires that we have. Everything's tuned in a Pythagorean system, which is really fun. And the tuning that we use, the ratio that represents a minor third in this case is 6:5. And so I thought to myself that I would make a 5.5-minute piece with 11 sections in it, 6 and 5, and then work out a way to kind of reflect that ratio in the form of the piece. And the piece ends up being closer to 6 minutes because at the end of it, I just got inspired by this samba and 3/4 idea, and I was like, I have to keep going. So I broke the rule at the end of it. But
Compositional rules are meant to be broken. It's great. Well, this was fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for taking time out of your tour. I want to make sure to mention some names on the album. Arcomusical is Gregory Beyer, Rachel Taylor, Ethan Martin, Elena Ross, Daniel Eastwood, Anthony Cable, Alexis Lamb, and Kyle Flens. And in terms of production folks, Greg engineered most of the tracks, and also Dan Nichols, who's on so many great albums, engineered track 11, and mixed and mastered the record as well. Photography, Constance Volk. Did you want to say something? Sorry. Oh, no.
Yeah, well, I'd just be happy to shout out Connie and her artwork. You're in front of a little slice of our album
Yes.
cover there, and that's a piece of art that that I commissioned as a sort of a wedding present, actually, for my wife Daphne. The piece is called "These Are the Meditations," um, and it's also reflective in a way of the Birnbaum's journey into this world of music that we're making. The right behind you, there's a little Birnbaum that's just floating along right there. You can see the gourd right at the edge of the stream there. So the idea of time and flow constantly moving and changing, and how culture is for everyone, and that culture is meant to be shared and meant to bring light into the world, as it flows down the river of time and in various people's hands over the course of time. So Connie is a really special artistic voice, and we're really proud to have her artwork on the album.
Yeah, it's beautiful artwork all around. Mark Wolf did a wonderful job with the design.
Amazing.
And really excited about this this album. It'll be out on March 25th on our panoramic imprint, PAN25. It'll be available all the places that you buy and don't buy music, and we really encourage everybody to spend some time with it. It's wonderful.
We're going to have a CD release event actually on April 3rd, Sunday, at Constellation in Chicago. So for all our Chicago friends and family, we would love you to join us. Connie's actually going to be there with us as well, sharing some of her artwork, and she's going to join us on a number two. She's a fabulous flutist as well as an artist.
Oh, so, yeah, of course.
Yeah. The album release will also be accompanied by several videos that we worked on with 410 Media. So we're really proud of those, and we'll be releasing those as well as the little teaser video to go with the album as well over the next month or so.
Fantastic. Well, have a great rest of the tour. Thank you guys so much for the engaging conversation, and congrats on this awesome album.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's really an honor to be represented on your label. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Privilege is all ours. Well, good luck, and hope to see all you soon. Bye-bye.
Sounds good.